Under the burning Arizona sun, the highway shimmered like molten glass. The heat rose in waves, bending the horizon until even the mountains looked like ghosts. Out there, on Highway 47, nothing usually stopped the flow of life. Trucks thundered north, cars drifted south, radios hummed, people passed each other without a word. But on that day, traffic came to a standstill, not because of a wreck, not because of construction. Something far smaller and far wilder had brought the world to a halt. In the center of the asphalt stood a lynx cub, barely a few months old, trembling but unyielding, its spotted fur glowing beneath the sun. It did not flee. It did not hide, it faced the line of cars like a sentinel of the desert, as if guarding something sacred. Drivers leaned out of windows, confused and impatient, but no one dared to move forward. And that was when Officer Claire Dalton arrived. For 12 years, she had patrolled these roads, chasing down speeders, helping stranded travelers, cleaning up after the careless. She had seen just about everything the desert could throw at her: dust storms, coyotes, overturned semis, but she had never seen this. As she stepped from her cruiser, the air hit her like a wall. She squinted beneath her hat brim, scanning the scene. A few people stood outside their cars, pointing toward the median. "It's been there for 20 minutes, one man said, his voice half awe, half worry. Claire followed his gaze, and what she saw made her pause. The cub wasn't lost, it was focused. Its eyes, gold and alive, locked on something invisible. Then, for the briefest moment, sunlight caught on a thin glint of metal around its hind leg. Something man-made, something that didn't belong. She felt the tug of instinct, the same quiet whisper that had kept her alive on lonely roads. This wasn't ordinary. She radioed dispatch, called for wildlife support, and waited. Minutes later, a white truck bearing the Arizona Wildlife Department logo rolled to a stop. Out stepped Dr. Alan Reed, a lean man with desert skin and patient eyes. Together, they studied the creature through binoculars. The tag shimmered in the heat. Alan frowned. "That's not one of ours," he said softly. "It's an emergency locator tag. Hikers carry those." He zoomed in again, muttering the code aloud: MH-2197. Claire felt a chill crawl up her spine. The numbers meant nothing to her, but to Alan they did. He pulled out his tablet, tapped a few screens, then looked up. "Mark Henson," he said, "wildlife rehabilitator out of Tucson. Missing since yesterday morning, went hiking near Kestrel Ridge. He never checked in." And in that moment, the lynx turned its head toward the trees, took 3 steps, and stopped. It looked back at them, eyes sharp and waiting. Alan whispered, "It wants us to follow." Claire's reply was simple: "Then we follow." They left the safety of the pavement and crossed into the raw belly of the desert. The heat pressed against their skin, but the air carried a strange stillness, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The lynx moved ahead, never too far, glancing back just often enough to guide them. Each step sank into red dust. The ground was littered with mesquite branches and dry sage. The sun hung motionless, the sky a sheet of blue fire. For nearly a mile they walked until something caught the light: a torn strap half buried in sand, a crushed water bottle, and the faint rust of dried blood on the stones. Alan knelt, tracing the prints with his fingers. Boots, size 11. Fresh, Claire's heart began to race. The cub made a soft churr, its tail flicking nervously, then darted forward toward a low ridge. They followed until the earth dropped away into a narrow ravine. At first, it looked empty. Just a tumble of rocks and the dry skeletons of fallen trees. But then Claire saw it, a figure half hidden beneath a log, unmoving, skin ghost pale against the dirt. She shouted, and the sound echoed off canyon walls. The man stirred, weak but alive. Alan grabbed the radio, calling for medevac, while Claire began her descent down the slope. It was steep, treacherous, but she moved fast, the urgency burning through her fatigue. The lynx was already there, pressed against the man's shoulder, nuzzling him with small, desperate sounds. When Claire reached the bottom, she dropped to her knees beside him. His lips were cracked, his eyes glazed from sun and thirst. Yet when he saw the cub, he smiled. "Echo," he whispered. "Good girl." Alan arrived moments later, checking his pulse, his leg, his breathing. "Compound fracture," he said, "but he's stable." Claire leaned closer. "You're Mark Henson," the man nodded weakly. "I was tracking her," he rasped. "Part of her release program. A storm hit, lightning struck, the tree fell before I could move. I couldn't reach my beacon." He looked toward the lynx, voice breaking. "So I strapped it to her harness, told her to go find the road, told her where there are roads, there are people. Where there are people, there's help." Claire blinked, trying to comprehend what she'd just heard. "You trusted a wild lynx to bring help," Mark smiled faintly. "Not trained, trusted." And with that, his eyes closed again. "They gave him water, splinted his leg, and waited for rescue." The sun began to lower, painting the canyon in molten reds and deep purples. Echo stayed curled beside her keeper, never moving more than a few inches away. Every time Mark stirred, she lifted her head, watching over him with something that looked an awful lot like devotion. 40 minutes later, the air shook with the heavy thrum of rotor blades. The helicopter descended through a storm of dust, medics rappelled down, and in the chaos of noise and wind, Claire looked once more at the cub. She was small, wild, beautiful, her fur streaked with dirt and her eyes calm as dawn. When the medics lifted Mark onto the stretcher, he reached out a trembling hand. Echo leaned forward, pressed her head against his palm, and released a sound so gentle it made even the rescuers pause. Claire would remember that sound for the rest of her life. The story spread faster than the wind. Wild lynx saves man's life, the headlines read. Desert miracle in Arizona. The world wanted to believe it, and why shouldn't they? It was proof that the wild could love back. Weeks later, Mark recovered in the hospital, his leg bound but his spirit unbroken. Echo was transferred to a sanctuary near Tucson under Dr. Allen's care. She adjusted easily, watching everything with the same steady gaze that had led two strangers through the desert. But for Claire, the story didn't end there. She found herself thinking about it constantly, the way the animal had waited on the road, the way those eyes had met hers. So one morning when her shift ended, she drove out to see them. Mark greeted her with a smile that carried the lines of survival. "Officer Dalton," he said, shaking her hand. "Or can I just call you Claire?" She laughed. "Only if I can call you the luckiest man in Arizona." He grinned. "Fair enough. Come on, there's someone who will want to see you." He led her to a wide enclosure surrounded by tall fencing and mesquite trees. Inside, Echo moved like liquid light, graceful and alert. When she spotted Claire, she stopped. For a long, still moment, the two simply looked at each other. Then Echo stepped forward, cautious but unafraid, until her face was inches from the wire. Claire knelt down, her reflection merging with the animals in the glass. "She remembers you," Mark said quietly. Claire didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence between them said everything. In the months that followed, Mark and Dr. Allen built something extraordinary, the Bridging Wild Hearts program, a sanctuary for animals like Echo, creatures that walked the edge between wild and domestic, too human to release, too wild to cage. Echo became the first of her kind, the face of a new movement. Her story appeared on morning shows, in magazines, in classrooms. Children wrote letters, donations poured in. The governor himself called to thank them, though he admitted, laughing, that the state didn't quite know how to give a medal to a lynx. By the time the new center opened, Echo had become more than an animal. She was a symbol, a living reminder of what happens when trust crosses the line between species. On the day of the grand opening, the sky was impossibly blue. The Wild Heart Center gleamed in the sunlight, a sanctuary of glass and stone nestled against the desert hills. Families filled the courtyard, reporters adjusted microphones, and banners fluttered in the wind. Mark took the podium, his voice steady, full of gratitude. He spoke of storms and survival, of faith and instinct, of the miracle that had crawled out of the desert with him. "Echo didn't just save my life," he said. "She reminded me that trust isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to move through it." The crowd fell silent. Then he turned toward Claire. "And to the officer who stopped when others drove past, who saw meaning where others saw madness, you listened. That's what made this possible." The applause that followed rolled like distant thunder, but Claire hardly heard it. Her eyes were on Echo, resting calmly on her rock, tail flicking, gaze locked once again with hers. In that gaze, Claire saw something eternal, wildness without hostility, intelligence without ego, spirit without speech. When the ceremony ended and the crowds drifted away, the desert returned to its quiet hum. The evening light turned the sky to gold. Claire stood alone by the enclosure, watching Echo stretch and wander. The lynx paused near the water's edge, ears twitching, eyes bright. Claire spoke softly, almost to herself. "You probably don't even know what you did, but you changed everything." She thought of her years on the highway, the endless miles of asphalt, the nights when the job felt like a loop without meaning. Somewhere along the way she had stopped believing in wonder. And yet here it was, a creature of instinct and earth reminding her that life still carried mystery. That faith wasn't always dressed in scripture. Sometimes it wore fur and walked on silent paws. Echo tilted her head, and for a fleeting second, the reflection of the setting sun burned in her eyes like fire. Claire smiled. "Sometimes," she whispered, "the wild saves us more than we save it." The wind rose, carrying the scent of dust and sage, and from somewhere deep in the enclosure came that familiar chirr, the sound that had echoed through the ravine months before. Claire looked up. Echo stood tall on the rock, the last rays of light painting her coat in gold. For one breathless heartbeat, the whole world seemed to pause again, just as it had that first day on the highway. Two souls, one human, one wild, bound by something wordless yet real. And in that stillness, Claire understood. Miracles aren't always thunder and light. Sometimes they come quietly, on four paws, with dust in their fur and purpose in their eyes. Sometimes they appear in the middle of an ordinary road and refuse to move until you finally stop long enough to see them. The wild does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and if you're lucky, you'll listen. Because out here in the wide silence of the desert, faith takes many forms. It might look like a badge or a beacon. It might look like a man trapped beneath a fallen tree. Or it might look like a lynx named Echo, standing in the sun, reminding us that compassion is the language that bridges every distance. And as the sun sank behind the horizon, painting the sand in hues of amber and rose, Claire walked back toward her cruiser. The sky stretched endlessly ahead of her, the kind of sky that makes you feel small and infinite all at once. She started the engine, the headlights cutting through the dusk, and for a moment she thought she saw movement in her rearview mirror, just a silhouette, slender and sure, crossing the road behind her, disappearing into the sagebrush. Maybe it was a trick of the light, maybe it was goodbye. Either way, she smiled, because somewhere out there, under the same vast sky, the wild still whispered, and the echo of that day would follow her forever. And so, remember this. Faith isn't always about what you can explain. It's about what you choose to follow when logic says turn back. Sometimes what saves us isn't human at all, but something purer, something untouched by doubt. The world may call it instinct, I call it grace. Because every now and then, on some lonely stretch of road, grace walks out of the wild and stands right in front of you.